Here is Noah Smith, and today we are going to talk about a theme that has been misunderstood for a long time. Feminine power. Why have strong women always caused fear? In the Bible, those who dared to act with courage, leadership, or strategic intelligence were labeled dangerous, manipulative, or impure. But what if what they called danger was actually power? In this video, we will explore how feminine energy, intense, intuitive, and transformative, has been misunderstood for centuries. We will look at women like Jezebel, Delilah, Judith, and others who dared to break the mold. Women who were feared not for doing evil, but for being too great for the confines of their time, and more. We will reflect on how this same strength is still misinterpreted today in women who take up space, have a voice, lead, or simply live their truth. If you have ever felt diminished for being intense, too sensitive, or difficult to deal with, this video is for you. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this with someone who will relate to this topic. Now, let's embark on this journey together. Since ancient times, feminine energy has been associated with everything that is deep, instinctive, invisible, and transformative. It is that force that cannot be seen, but is felt. It embraces, envelops, heals. And when disrespected, it also distances, breaks, and destroys. In spiritual tradition, this energy is called yin, receptive, intuitive, connected to nature and the right timing of things. But it was precisely because it is so invisible and mysterious that the world learned to fear it. In the Bible, many women who carried this power were seen as a threat, not because they did evil in itself, but because they did not fit in. They thought, spoke, acted, and often influenced. In a society shaped by patriarchal laws, where control was synonymous with safety, any woman who expressed her energy freely was quickly classified as disobedient, dangerous, or even demonic. This repression was not just social or moral, it was energetic. The feminine in its purest form is difficult to dominate because it does not follow linear logic. It feels before it acts. It intuits before it decides. That's why Delilah, for example, used silence and charm before bringing down the giant. Jezebel led with strength and authority, and that was unforgivable. Judith used calm and beauty to destroy an army. All channeled this energy that did not need to shout to be powerful. Today we call this magnetism, presence, emotional intelligence. But at that time, it was read as witchcraft, rebellion, affront. The most interesting thing is that this feminine energy is not restricted to women. It exists in all of us, men and women, but manifests more intensely in those who allow themselves to feel and be. And the closer a woman gets to her deep nature, the more she bothers those who are trapped by control. That's why understanding this energy is the first step to healing the fear that has been placed within and outside of us. The fear of intuition, the fear of the body, the fear of being too great. Now that we understand what truly made these women dangerous, let's explore what happened when this power became action. Not all strength imposes itself with screams. Some women marked biblical history precisely because they dared to be true to themselves, even when the world said it was wrong. And this silent or explosive courage, depending on the situation, is what made them dangerous in the eyes of a culture that expected obedience, not daring. Let's start with Jezebel, perhaps the most demonized name in the Bible. She was a queen who did not bow down. She ruled with authority, influenced political decisions, confronted prophets, protecting her faith and her people. but by challenging a male-dominated system, she was transformed into the symbol of the evil, promiscuous, destructive woman. But was she truly wicked? Or was she simply a woman who knew what she wanted and was not afraid to lead? Another example is Judith, an apparently fragile widow, who in times of war used her beauty, intelligence, and spirituality to save her city. She infiltrated the enemy camp, seduced General Holofernes, and when he slept, she cut off his head. Coldness, number strategy, courage, mission. We also have Jael, who welcomed a weary enemy into her tent, offered him rest, and then, with precision, drove a stake into his head while he slept. These actions may seem shocking, but when we look beyond the surface, we see women who acted with the strength they had available in a world that did not grant them swords or a public voice. They used intelligence, their bodies, emotional and spiritual energy to win invisible battles. And of course, Delilah, often seen as Samson's betrayer. But think, she lived under Philistine domination in a culture where alliances were a matter of survival. Her weapon was seduction, yes. But what she used was not just her body. It was her emotional reading of a man who could not perceive his own limits. These women did not obey. They decided, and that decision was interpreted as a rupture, as an affront. That is why they were marked by history as dangerous, when, in fact, they were simply true to their own energy. But why, over time, did the system transform this strength into sin? Why did the free woman become a symbol of temptation? And how does this still echo today? Over time, the story of biblical women who dared to act with power has been rewritten. It was not enough just to silence them. They needed to be transformed into a warning. And so, feminine power became sin. Courage became disobedience. Sensuality became promiscuity. Intuition became witchcraft. This distortion did not happen by chance. It was a form of control. In a society where the masculine was dominant, free femininity represented a threat to the established order. A woman who thought for herself, felt intensely, or made decisions outside the expected roles was treated as someone to be corrected or feared. Take the example of Delilah. By using affection and magnetism to influence Samson, she was immortalized as a symbol of betrayal. But no one talks about Samson's uncontrolled power, or about how he let pride guide him. The blame always fell on her. Just like with Eve, accused of leading man into sin, as if curiosity, desire, and questioning were flaws exclusively feminine. And the most curious thing is that the system did not only reject this strength, it sexualized it and then condemned it. The strong woman became a symbol of temptation. The free woman became a figure of scandal. Jezebel was associated with the worship of false gods and lust, when in fact her strength was political and strategic. The Bible does not detail her sexual acts, but tradition made sure to label her with the image of the sinful woman. Why? Because it was easier to discredit her strength by calling her vulgar. This is a logic that still works today. Women who speak firmly are called bossy. Those who have sexual expression are seen as easy. Those who do not fit the role of the passive and submissive woman are judged for being hard to love. In other words, the ancient judgment remains alive. It has just changed its appearance. And how does this feminine energy still discomfort? Why do so many women still feel guilty for simply being intense, sensitive, or powerful? Let's talk about that. Centuries have passed since Jezebel was called a witch, Delilah a traitor, and Eve a sinner. But is it really different today? Perhaps the world no longer uses the same names, But the judgment continues. Even today, many women are taught to apologize for their own intensity, to hide their feelings, control their voice, soften their presence. How many times have you asked yourself, am I being too much? Too much for whom? The truth is that feminine energy continues to scare people because it cannot be easily controlled. It feels what has not been said. It perceives what is not visible. It changes the environment simply by being present. It's that coworker who doesn't need to raise her voice, but everyone pays attention when she speaks. That woman who walks into a room and effortlessly attracts gazes. That mother, friend, sister, or wife who intuits when something is wrong, even when everyone says that everything is fine. And that discomforts people, because it is a type of power that cannot be measured, but can be felt. We live in a culture that still rewards rational efficiency, emotional control, cold logic. But feminine energy is the opposite. It is cyclical, deep, emotional, connected to the invisible. And for that reason, even today, many women are called complicated, intense, drama queens, when, in fact, they are just deeply feeling something that others ignore. The curious thing is that when this energy is used to heal, embrace, or create, it is admired. But when it imposes itself, denounces, confronts, or says no, it is once again labeled as dangerous, just like in the past. The judgment of feminine strength is, at its core, the fear of what it reveals in others, because by allowing herself to be whole, a woman awakens in others the awareness of what is repressed, and not everyone is ready for that. Do you have any idea what we can learn from these biblical women today? How can we transform this power into awareness, balance, and growth? After everything we've seen so far, an inevitable question arises. What to do with this strength that lives inside so many women, and that for so long has been labeled as dangerous? The answer is not to deny it or hide it, but to recognize it, integrate it, and learn to channel it consciously. The feminine energy is like a river. When repressed, it overflows destructively. But when respected and directed, it becomes a source of life, creation, and wisdom. Looking at biblical women with new eyes helps us realize this. They were judged because they broke with what was expected. But today, perhaps, they serve as mirrors for what we also try to hide in ourselves. Boldness, intuition, sexuality, spirituality, emotional intelligence. These women represent aspects that we all, men and women, carry to some degree. The strength of Jezebel, the intelligence of Judith, the magnetism of Delilah, the courage of Jael, the questioning of Eve. All of these are legitimate expressions of the human soul. Denying these parts does not make us more balanced. It makes us disconnected. Therefore, the first step is to acknowledge that this energy exists, yes, within us. And it is not sin, it is not madness, it is not excess, it is power. The second step is to integrate, and this means stopping to divide the world between goodies and dangerous, between submissive women and rebellious women. The balanced woman is not the one who diminishes herself, but the one who knows when to embrace and when to set boundaries, when to be silent and when to assert herself, when to give and when to preserve her own energy. And finally, we come to the third step, channeling. Because feminine power is not something to dominate others, but to transform. Women who channel this energy consciously do not need to prove anything. They become healers, leaders, creators, guides, artists, mothers of children or ideas. They stop asking for permission to exist and start creating spaces where others can also flourish. And this does not mean it will be easy. Every woman who awakens her energy will face resistance, both within herself and outside. She will encounter moments of doubt, fear, and guilt. After all, we have been taught for generations that being strong was being dangerous, and being dangerous meant being punished. But today, we have the chance to rewrite this story, to look at the women of the Bible not only as characters of the past, but as symbols of living aspects of our psyche and our personal journey. They did not come to teach us to fear the feminine. They came to remind us of our ability to feel, decide, break, rebuild, influence, and above all, exist in wholeness. So, it is no longer about choosing between being nice or being feared. It is about being whole, with light and shadow, with sweetness and strength, with boundaries and surrender. This is the true hidden power that lives in so many of us, and that, when awakened, transforms everything around us. And if what they call too much in you is, in fact, what the world needs most, we have reached the end of this journey. And if you have stayed until now, it's because something inside you recognizes that these stories are not just about the past. They speak about the present. Women like Jezebel, Delilah, Judith, Jael, and so many others have been labeled as dangerous, sinful, treacherous, or manipulative. But when we look more closely, we realize that much of what was called danger was simply strength, courage, and presence that could not be controlled. Throughout history, we have been conditioned to fear everything we do not understand, and feminine power, with its emotional depth, intuitive sensitivity, and invisible strength, has long been misunderstood. Instead of being honored, it was judged. Instead of being embraced, it was repressed. And the reflection of this still echoes in the women of today, who often feel confused, torn between pleasing and being true, between being silent to avoid bothering others, or speaking out and risking being called excessive. But perhaps now is the time to rewrite this narrative. Perhaps the greatest revolution we can make today is to allow women to be whole, without labels, without stereotypes, without the need to fit into outdated molds. A woman can be sweet and firm, sensitive and rational, intuitive and strategic. She can feel anger and still be loving. She can be sexual without being vulgar. She can be a leader without being bossy. Because deep down, these dualities are part of the human soul, and denying them is to deny life itself. So, what can we do to avoid continuing to reproduce the stereotypes of the past? We can start by educating with more awareness, teaching girls from an early age that feeling is not weakness, that expressing themselves is not being dramatic, that having an opinion is not being insolent. We can stop telling women to control themselves all the time and start saying, understand yourself, listen to yourself, respect yourself. We can create safe spaces where the feminine can flourish in its entirety, without fear of judgment or exclusion. And you? Have you thought from this angle before? Comment below. Which of these biblical women surprised you the most or made you reflect? Have you ever felt at any moment that you had to hide your intensity, your opinion, or your truth to avoid being misunderstood? And more importantly, what can we do together to avoid perpetuating these labels in the next generations? Let's talk. Let's reflect. Let's build new stories, more human, more true. If this content touched you in any way, share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And of course, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave your like, because here we talk about soul, consciousness, and transformation. See you in the next video. with respect, courage, and light. Noah Smith.